Hey there, I'm Dan, the self-proclaimed lonely rocker. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I wanted to have a little chit-chat video today, just have a conversation with you guys, hang out a little bit. Always like to hear what you guys are thinking. So we're going to leave the amps and the guitars in the background. Mind you, look at this guy. Just went out to get some milk and I came home with this thing. This was the deal of the century. Brand new guitar. If you'd like to see me cover this in a dedicated video, you're definitely going to be seeing it on the channel in regular intervals. But if you want me to cover this in a dedicated video, please let me know in the comments. But I'm having a ton of fun with this guy, my first ESP guitar. Anyways, I wanted to talk about something today. I have a group of YouTube friends. We have this little private chat group. It's probably 14, 15 people in there, various guitar-based YouTube channels. And it's interesting to compare notes with these guys because we're all of various sizes. Some, as little as 1,000 subscribers, and a couple with over 100,000 subscribers. And we compare notes. We share comments from you, the viewer. We do read the comments. They're important. We may not agree with everything, but it's good to get perspective. But what seems to be kind of common and a lot of the threads and comments that we're seeing is what I'm calling sort of the great divide. Depending on how old you are, your experience, your perspective is going to be different. It's sometimes shocking to hear someone write or see someone write something that just sounds so naive, like that comment that I showed you in the opening of this video about Eric Clapton and Keith Richards. Whether you're a fan of either one of those guitar players, no matter how old you are, we just figured, well, you got to appreciate where they came from, right? But it got me thinking that it's all about perspective. It's easy to call someone naive when they actually don't know. If you're of my vintage, I don't need to publish my age, but I got a few grays here. You can guess approximately how old I am. I feel like I'm well positioned because I appreciate the traditional way of doing things. I mean, being a great musician is important to me, always has been. I love real amplifiers. I love pedals. And to me, that's what a guitar sound is supposed to be. It comes from an amp, it comes from pedals, it comes from your fingers playing a guitar. But I have modelers here. I record with a DAW. I have controllers here. These are digital products. I've grown up in the digital age and I've embraced digital. It's been an integral part of my professional career. So to say that I'm some analog snob couldn't be further from the truth. So sort of sitting here, sort of in the precipice from one era into another, guitar players who are coming up today, I'm talking about the teenagers who are picking up a guitar for the first time, are so far removed from the artists that guys of my generation feel are just so integral and so vital to our instrument. I think the 90s is probably the last great decade where rock music was really vital. It hasn't been since. It's sort of slipping back and back. And it's indicative of how the music industry is changing. A lot of great rock guitar players are on YouTube and don't actually even have a band or even a known band. So it's a different time. But rock doesn't feel as vital, at least in popular culture, as it was the 90s. I mean, I think some of the bands, and I didn't listen to 90s bands in the 90s. This is what's so funny. I mean, I was into bands of the 70s when I was in the 90s, but have since. I mean, I love bands like Tool and Soundgarden, Rage Against the Machine, Alice in Chains. My goodness, some incredible, incredible bands. The reason I bring this up is because of that comment. I don't know who that guy was. He could have been an older guy for all I know, but let's assume he's some 15-year-old that's never really paid attention to where Eric Clapton came from or Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones. Think of the music that you were listening to when you were 14 years old. Chances are you had a group of friends that were listening to the same music. Now, I wasn't into popular music when I was younger. I never got sucked into that. But I listened to the music that my friends liked. This was our soundtrack. This was the backtrack, the music to everything that I was doing. It was important to me. And the things that I tried to do as a guitar player emulated those sounds. I wanted a Gibson guitar. My first amp over here. It's a crappy old amp. I don't play it anymore, but it was an amplifier. I keep it because it's sentimental. It means something to me, right? There's an emotional attachment to this. Now, imagine you're 14, you're hearing Tim Henson. And by the way, if you're 14, 15 years old and you're listening to rock music, bless you. We need you. More on that in a minute. But if you're 14, you codgers out there, 40, 50, 60 years old, imagine you're 14 and suddenly you're hearing Tim Henson and Polyphia. And then you're just blown away by these sounds. You're probably discovering them on social media. You probably got earbuds in your ear. So you're getting just surrounded by these amazing sounds that you're hearing for the first time. And then you just get so drawn into it. And then you want to understand, how did they make these sounds? Well, they're out on social media and they're selling plugins and digital products and things like that. And for $100, you can just have all of these sounds. You can create these sounds. You might not be able to play like Tim Henson, but you're creating these amazing sounds. So as you start to grow up, you're going to have an emotional connection to these tools. It's a plug-in. Okay, it's not something you can hold in your hand, but perhaps you picked up his signature Ibanez at some point. But these are the tools that connect you to your early milestones, and we never ever forget those. And that's that really emotional link that music has, and especially from one guitar player to many of you, we attribute these milestones to really important events in our life, right? And these are things that we never forget. I don't know if you remember the first bar chord you played, but I'm sure there's certain milestones in your guitar playing that you'll never forget, or there's certain things that you do that can be linked to those milestones. And then you can link those to the guitar and the gear that you were using at the time. It's very much an emotional connection. So if you're 14 years old and you're listening to Tim Henson and Polyphia and you're playing through this plugin, and then suddenly your dad comes up to you and says, "Hey, you got to listen to Eric Clapton. He's one of the greatest of all time." You're going to listen to it and think that, well, this is old man playing pentatonic riffs next to this like eloquent, just very complex music. He's not going to make that link. He's not going to be able to make that leap right there. He's not going to understand, because this is the world that he grew up in. And things have gotten more technical. I mean, how many people have said that Jimmy Page was sloppy? I've heard that many, many times. Maybe compared to some of the guitar players today that are just so precise. But back in the era when Led Zeppelin first came out, I mean, I just can't imagine what that must have felt like to hear that music and how intricate it was and how melodic it was and how much depth and layers to it. Incredible. But as you get older as a guitar player, hopefully at some point you're going to open up your ears a little bit. But I think the responsibility rests on us, the older generation. Because my dad, growing up, he was into jazz and he wasn't really into rock music, but he always appreciated good drummers. And as a Rush fan growing up, you'd never catch my father listening to Rush. But whenever Rush released a new live album, there was always a new drum solo. And it was always customary that I would show my dad the drum solo. And he always appreciated it. And it made me feel good. Because, kids, they don't want to listen to the music their parents are listening to. For me, I started to embrace it. And I wasn't listening to my music as a rebellion against my parents. So for my father to accept some of the music that I was listening to was extremely important to me. It made me feel good. Now, he wasn't just, blasting 2112 at that point, but he started to have an appreciation for the band. He wasn't a Rush fan and he wouldn't listen to it all the time, but there were some songs he started to hear and he could actually appreciate the musicianship that went into that. And from someone who grew up, who was into like jazz and that sort of thing, and he appreciated great musicians, for him to recognize that the guys in Rush were great players, for a teenage kid, I mean, it meant the world to me. So if you're a father and you have a kid who's into music and he's into rock music, he might be into this sort of modern progressive metal, the throaty screaming and all this stuff that maybe you don't understand. I think it would be the wrong thing to push it away or just to say it's garbage. If rock is going to survive past this generation and into the next generation, we need to embrace newer bands. The rock radio stations I listen to have been playing the same music for 40 years, right? I mean, I love hearing AC/DC and Rush and Aerosmith and Zeppelin on the radio. It's always great to hear it. But they're forcing this music that we've been listening to for so many years, and they're sucking up all the airwaves and preventing younger bands from getting heard by the next generation. And there's a divide between us and kids who are still listening to rock music, just listening to different bands. So if you're of my vintage and you have kids, I think it's important to listen to what they're listening to. If it's rock, embrace it. You may not love it, it might not be your thing, but take an interest in what they're listening to. They always say to be interesting is to be interested. Take a listen to what they're listening to, and you'll be surprised. They might actually appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to listen to the music. And if you do that, there may be a chance to have a discussion. And if you can have a discussion, there may be a window to start introducing them to some of the older artists. Now, a lot of people are listening to older music, just watching YouTube and all these reaction channels, and they all seem to really, really like it. So there's definitely an opportunity there. But I think it's important that being the older one, we need to open our ears a little bit and teach our kids how to listen. We can't force them to appreciate our music. If they get it out of the box, wonderful. But understand that if they are into rock music during an era where hip hop is drowning out everything, I think that's an amazing thing. And we should take the time to appreciate the rock bands that they're listening to try to understand it and engage with them. Because suddenly now you have dialogue about it and you can start sharing. And then that might open your child's mind up to other kinds of music and maybe appreciating where this all came from. I'm not suggesting a 14-year-old needs to be a fan of Eric Clapton, but if you're a student of the guitar, it's always great to know where it came from. And I think it's the responsibility of us, the older ones who've gone through it, to share those experiences with our kids, but we want them to be interested. We can't force that. So I think it's important for us to take an interest in what they are listening to. I keep telling my kids, you got to find some new rock bands for your dad. I mean, the old bands, they're not here anymore. I mean, the Van Halens, the Rushes, they're out of service. They're not playing anymore. We can't go see them live. So if you are of my vintage and you have kids, I think it's really, really important to listen to what your kids are listening to, especially if they are listening to some form of rock music, even if you hate it. Let's engage in conversation with them. And at some point, you might have a meeting of the minds and you might both discover something new that you never heard before. And I think that's really important. Anyways, just something I wanted to get off my chest today. Would love to hear your thoughts. Are you a parent? Do you have kids? What are you doing about this whole rock business this day and age? Unfortunately, rock just doesn't seem to be as vital as it used to be, but I think it should be. And it's really up to us to help make that happen. So we'd love to hear your thoughts about that. If you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. And remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll. I'll catch you in the next one.